African Export-Import Bank, the trade finance bank for Africa.
Hello and welcome to the latest edition of our series on intra-Africa trade, Africa Trade Lines. I am Wale Famirewa. On today's program, I have the pleasure of moderating a discussion on the way forward for Africa as a trading bloc with the rest of the world, even as individual countries engage other trade blocs. Joining me to discuss this topic are Joe Femi Dagunro, former president of the Nigerian-German Business Group. Jumoke Oduwole is the Senior Special Assistant to Nigeria's President on Industry, Trade and Investment. And Vincent Wani is a director at the Lagos Chamber of Commerce and Industries. Thank you so much for joining us for this conversation. And Vincent, I want to start with you, as you can just, if you can, reflect on the state of trade between Africa and the rest of the world right now. It's obviously not the greatest. Incidentally, I was reading about the extent of trade between Nigeria and Germany, for instance, or Africa and Germany rather, and it's only somewhere around 2% of the trade between Germany and the rest of the world comes to Africa. Now, they're trying to change that, but your thoughts about the state of affairs right now?
It's very poor when it comes to trade. For a continent, African continent accounting for about 15-16% of world population, but only accounting for 2.5% of global trade. You can see a huge mismatch. And this 2.5% is just the volume of trade, mostly on mineral, raw materials. If you want to talk about value, which is where the money comes from, we're talking about something far less than 2%. That is the value of trade of Africa relative to the rest of the world. So it is really, really, really very, very low. And the worst case is even the intra-African trade. The rate at which African countries trade among themselves is also very low at 12%. Compared to other trade blocs in the world, such as the Eurozone, you see about 34%, the rate at which countries in the European Union trades among themselves. So if we are talking about Africa, we see a lot of huge disconnect. I've mentioned about population, I've mentioned our contribution to trade in volume and value to the world is still really, really very low. So I think it is time for us to begin to look at the impediments, both tariff and non-tariff impediments.
Right. At the end of the day, I think it's all about partnerships, and that's what we're talking about today. And Joe, if you can just reflect on this, getting partnerships to work between Africa and the rest of the world, you could cite perhaps examples of regional blocs like ECOWAS and how that is working with the European Union, for instance. From your experience, what are your thoughts on the quality of partnerships and what really makes these partnerships work?
Yeah, basically, you just like Vincent just recently mentioned, you understand the fact that most of European partners, or most of the European community partners, they have their standards and they have their, tariffs, and some of those things they have opened up to have a partnership. Recently, you have this EU-ECOWAS partnership that's just been signed. Nigeria has not signed part of it. So there's reluctancy from some African governments signing this partnership that will open the trade opportunity for its people. So now if you have countries not signing, there's nothing much that the European community can do. But the fact remains that we have to, within the African countries, we have to begin to look at what are the impediments. I tell you what, if you look at some of the things that has been discussed within the African Union, the African Union has all these plans, all these resolutions and all these re-engineering. They have all of these things in theory, but to practicalize some of this thing has always been a problem. And like you said, the tariffs are so badly managed. The customs, the regional borders are badly managed. So there are a lot of things that are badly managed that unless we begin to see in itself. But if you look at even within ECOWAS, the good thing is that there's no information or good information being spread out. The ECOWAS is supposed to have ECOWAS fund for member countries. How many investors, how many businesses actually understand that there's an ECOWAS fund? So there's lack of information, good information coming within the system itself, whereby the people, the citizens will begin to look at, let us partnership with some of these countries and let us begin to do something. But that notwithstanding, we still have some partnerships that are working in the area of gas and, like I said, the mineral resources and some other areas.
Right. Perhaps as you've just mentioned, commodities, that are exported out of Africa obviously are moving to where they're needed across the world. But let's speak to Jumoke and get her perspective on this. Thank you so much for joining us today, Jumoke. And your thoughts on the quality of partnerships that Nigeria as a country in Africa has with the rest of the world. We can take, for instance, the example of the European Union. And I do know that this government is trying to improve the quality of partnerships. I count several, for instance, with what the government is trying to do with India in the area of ICT, even the Middle East in terms of plans to export food into that region, the US likewise. So your thoughts on how we can get these partnerships to work better?
Thanks, Wole. Thanks for having me on the program today. It's really about thinking about each country's economic policy, trade direction and investments, and where you want to be. So where does Nigeria want to be in 50 years' time? That's the starting point for any serious country. Now, Nigeria for a number of years has had a bit of a disconnect between trade, investment, and just general partnerships. We've had not a very coherent trade policy. And this administration has sought to change that. We have a new Nigerian Office for Trade Negotiation headed by a very senior level WTO diplomat. He just resigned to join us, and he's the chief negotiator for the country. When you start that, and then you have the Nigerian Investment Promotion Commission working on investments across the globe, you now start to see a coherence starting from our Economic Recovery Growth Plan, and you find that everything is now coordinated and we're all pulling in the same direction.
All right, and
when any country wants to enter, sorry?
Yeah, go ahead. Sorry, finish your sentence.
Yeah, when you want to enter a partnership, you need to look at what's going to work for you. Ideally, win-win. And when we look at where we're trying to go to, diversifying into things like agriculture because we want jobs for our huge population. It's a no-brainer why people want to do business with Nigeria. Our market size is more than half of the whole of ECOWAS. Having said that, our market is still, large as it is, not large enough. So Nigerians need to manufacture more. We need to have a diversification plan. We need to have an export policy, which is exactly what we're doing, and pushing throughout the country global standards, getting very competitive, which is where the ease of doing business comes in, and just positioning for partnerships and looking for opportunities that are win-win across the world, particularly in Africa.
Right. And she made a point, Vincent, about the coherence of a plan. And your thoughts on the strategic thinking that needs to go into building trade partnerships across the world. Obviously, Nigeria and every other country in Africa is competing with other countries in other parts of the world for those partnerships. And as globalization continues, you do get the sense that it's a very stiff competition right now. So your thoughts about the coherence of strategy and the long-term thinking that really needs to get into this?
Yes, picking it up from where Jumoke stopped, they say that charity begins at home. If we want to compete favorably in the competitive global market, we need to do the right things at home first. And that is where the ease of doing business comes from. My colleague in the studio here mentioned that Nigeria have not signed the economic partnership agreement with the EU. Why are we dragging our foot from signing that? Because of a lot of issues. Competitiveness, we find out that we are not competitive. If we open our doors, these guys will bring in cheaper commodities, more quality. So our competitiveness, and what is distorting our competitiveness? Difficult ease of doing business. You cannot get credit, you cannot get electricity, you cannot move your goods around, because of logistics, bad road, no rail, and a lot of things. See, ease of doing business is thank God this administration is doing their best. At least they've been able to take this ease of doing business issue to the top of the table. It's no longer under the table. The ones they can fix, they are fixing with registration and whatever. But you know what? Logistics, electricity, power remains a very huge, even business dispute. We don't have court that resolves business dispute. There's a whole lot. We still have a long way to go to keep our house in order, such that we can become competitive. And it's nice that we're not having a negotiator, but who is the negotiator negotiating for? Is it the trade agreement, or is it the individual company to company trade or whatever conversation, the buying and selling conditions? So it's important that this news is also a little bit expanded, so that those of us in the commerce and industry we know exactly what is happening and key into the negotiation arrangement. It's a good news, but like I said, charity begins at home. The Ease of Doing Business Council, Kwik Jumoke, have been doing a very good job. They need to sustain that and go into the hard areas. They are still in the soft areas.
All right. Do you want to react on this point as well?
She made a good point, actually, because we all know that before now, there are a lot of distortions here and there. But I want to come into that as well, that we have to basically begin to see our embassies as an outlet for, giving out information. So if you go to some of our embassies abroad, you will discover that trade and business information, they are not really available. And we can't depend solely on Google or wherever to be able to. We should be able to have, look, in Europe, you have Euro pages, just Euro pages. Despite the fact that they know everybody can still Google and do stuff, they have Euro pages for businesses. So we should be able to have such information. And we should be able to train our people. Manpower training, that is very important about that, because most of the news you hear about Nigeria is all these kind of political things that people really, they get scared. I'm interested in the fact that businesses want to come to Nigeria, no doubt about that. And businesses that want to come to Nigeria, in some cases, they want to come and come partnership with the existing businesses. That's why you see Dangote, attracting investors to invest in his business, because they have seen someone who is, despite all the challenges, we have a business that is thriving. Right. And it's better for us to continue to dish out some information that we attract more businesses into the country. And when you look at it, you see, when we say made in Nigeria has to be of quality. And if you see some of our friends and brothers in the East doing these shoe manufacturing, you see, we have to begin to look at areas. I agree with people with the mindset that, okay, agriculture is a good one for our export, but this shoe business is a good business. That is by Brazil. You talk about shoes from Brazil, from Spain, from Italy. But then the men and women in Aba, they have the ideas to manufacture, to build the quality of the shoes. We cannot export them even beyond our own shores here. So what do they need to do? They need money to have infrastructures. They need to buy good machineries. They need to train their people. And from there, we have to begin to look at all those infrastructures and the materials they need. We export leather from Nigeria. We are not producing enough shoes, and we still import shoes into the country. So like he said, like Vincent said, we need to look at our home base and begin to prioritize. I know it's not going to be a one night or one day issue. I mean, it's going to be a long time thing. But the continuity, and like Jumoke said, is the consistency as well of government policies to be executed. It is not only the federal government we should be looking at. We should be looking at the state government and the local government as well. They should be partaking in this new concerted effort by the federal government to make things work. Because every time we just talk about, we talk about the federal government. But look at what Lagos State has set up. Lagos State set up a kind of one-stop shop. When you are coming to Lagos State, we are ready to take it from there. And I believe we have to begin to look at, you can't have somebody in Nigeria embassy, for instance in Germany, who is representing you in your trade and related businesses that cannot speak the language. I mean, you have to flow into the people to talk to them. And that's why the fact that English is the common language. But let people representing us in some other areas speak the language of the people. So that gives us an added advantage as well.
Let's get Jumoke to react to some of the points made. And Jumoke, if you can react to, I think, two key points. The first one is about the role of this negotiator. And then the second will be on dissemination of information. That obviously is critical to success.
Okay, so I'm wondering whether 1 hour would really be enough for this conversation. Not to make it totally Nigeria-centric, but the role of a chief negotiator around the world is to make sure that there's coherence between the economic policy of the country and the agreements signed by that country with the international community, whether it's regional, whether it's a bilateral, whether it's a plurilateral, or whether it's a multilateral agreement. Now, in the past, Nigeria had signed different agreements. So we have even some conflicting agreements. So the role of the chief negotiator is to harmonize that and to make sure that it aligns with Nigeria's economic policy as laid down by the government. Now, exactly the point that Vincent was making, there has to be coherence between the private sector. So in other countries, you have a very strong private sector lobby that influences government policy And there has to be an alignment. And that is the direction that this administration is taking. You have to, there's a council for industrialization, and it's made up of 90% private sector. Really saying what matters to industrialists. I mean, Lagos Chamber of Commerce and Industry are active members, and they visit the presidency regularly. They visit on a quarterly basis. So we have the feedback. We know what areas they want to go into. We know what areas matter to their members. And we take that feedback into the economic policy of the country. And as we negotiate at a macro level. And what this does is that when businesses go into whatever country, the agreements that are overlain at a macro level are then able to translate into favorable terms and conditions for them.
All right. Can you also speak briefly to the point about the dissemination of information? I think that's also a critical point if we're going to see some success in getting partnerships to work.
It's been one of the backbones of our drive in this administration. Transparency is all about bridging an asymmetry gap. When potential investors, whether domestic or international, have key information, they can take viable decisions. When they know, for instance, with solid minerals, when they know what minerals are where, from Australia, they can take decisions about whether they want to invest in Nigeria, if they do where, and how much they want to invest. When it's agriculture, when you know what regions grow what, the access to water, the access to ports, infrastructure, then you can take decisions. When you know the labor force, when you know the skill sets of a particular people, when you know the climate, the temperature, all the information that investors need to know, whether I'm sitting in Abuja and I want to know what's happening in Borno right now, what would thrive there, I can find out. So we're encouraging every single ministry, department, and agency to put up a lot more information. And the Nigerian Investment Promotion Commission is at the forefront of this drive, making sure that investors have critical information available to them to make quality decisions. We're also working with the Federal Ministry of Foreign Affairs to make sure that our missions abroad, that's a very key point that was made, that they have the information that people need. And of course, we work with the diplomatic community here in Nigeria to make sure that their countries know what is available, know exactly the most current information to enable quality decisions. Without this, people are risk averse, people are hesitant, but when information demystifies risk.
All right. Let's take this beyond Nigeria. She did make the point about not making this too Nigeria-centric. We have a great example of Germany making a very deliberate effort to engage Africa in this Marshall Plan for Africa. And you obviously have lived in Germany for a long time. Give us your perspective on how countries in Africa can really take this opportunity to establish stronger trade ties with the biggest economy in Europe.
Yes, the point is you have to always look at it from the fact that this time around, it's not just about African government going to European governments or whatever and say, look, give us, begging. It should be a kind of situation, we have this, excuse me, we have this and we can give you this. I mean, you come back to us and buy this and we can make money together. But the fact, before now, it has always been, sending or giving us aids. When there's a problem, you give us aid for this, for that. But the tide is changing gradually, that African government begins to look, come and invest in our country, just like what Nigeria is doing. And you see that South Africa is doing that well, and see some other East African countries and West African countries doing that well as well. But the point is, African region has been so divided into sub-regional groups as well. You have the SADC, you have the COMESA, you have EACC, you have so many sub-regional associations or group, fighting for all their own interests, like, because of their own sovereignty as well. But now the problem is, if African Union as the head, we come back to the realization of not just talking just about this and issuing communiques and resolutions, begin to have a kind of plan for themselves as well. And say, look, this is a plan for us all. And this plan we have to begin to, execute, because the problem has always been execution. All these plans we are talking about has been made, has been planned, has been deliberated upon, and it's now for each member state to begin now to execute some of these programs and to say this is what we have to do. So now, African Union, head of states or ministerial council must follow up with the execution and prioritize some of these things. Because the idea to have a common currency, I mean, nobody knows what's going on till now. The idea to have a common tariff and all that. So that is why, just like Jumoke said, every country will want to, defend its own policy. And don't forget one thing. Some African nations or African countries will not want to be part of all this at the immediate setup, because they will feel the bigger or the richer countries will want to dominate them. So there will be reluctancy to really set up the board. If it is just about few countries that will set it up, like we have all these regional associations like ECOWAS and SADC and all that, let us begin to come up to do it. And some other ones will follow up later, because we can't get all African states to begin to set up the whole thing and make it work. So having this common goal of this African trade, free trade areas that is being planned, I think there's need for countries that are ready, but no country right now is ready, because the training is not even there right now. The borders cannot just be open to everybody to come in. And that is why you have even the movement of goods and persons not fully being executed. If you still go to some countries, even with ECOWAS, they still challenge you. What are you doing here? How long are you going to stay here? I mean, and if you are going through the EU border, nobody asks you this question, how long are you going to stay? You just wave your passport and say you go. Apart from now that a lot of controls are coming up, and you have Brexit and some of these things that are happening. But the freedom of movement and goods have to be properly coordinated in all this region. The East African countries are doing it a lot more better, and I thank God for Nigeria that has said, listen, you can get your visa. Investors can come into the country and get their visa at the airport. If you go to any of these East African countries, like, if you go to Nairobi today, you get your visa to go to Uganda, to go to Tanzania, and to go to, Rwanda. So these are the things. It should not be only when you come to Nigeria. You should be able to get an ECOWAS visa as well. You should be able to get an, East African visa access into the region. Right. But, we are doing it now because, okay, why don't we take it at the ECOWAS level, that if you come to Nigeria, you can as well go to Ghana for a weekend, and that should be something that should be done. So there's still a lot more to be done, but it's a good step in the right direction.
Vincent, can you also reflect on this point and maybe speak to practical steps that governments in Africa can take to take advantage of this move by Germany to engage Africa more?
Yes, I think one of the first things is to begin to ask ourselves, the trade agreements, for instance, the AGOA, why has Africa not been able to make optimal use of that window? If we are able to answer that question, then we've done ourselves a lot of good. Standardization issue, quality issue, no matter how open or the beauty of a trade agreement, and I've said before that charity begins at home, and your home is not in order. You cannot manufacture, you cannot produce even the raw material that is needed elsewhere. Yeah. You have a big problem. No country will compromise quality. You get to a place like Japan now, they are not talking about food alone, but superfood. It has to meet the highest quality of standard, and they are not going to ask you because it's coming from West Africa, where you do things the way you like. It has to meet European standard or American standard. Having said that, Africa need to connect. We need to connect among ourselves. We heard that now you can drive a train. There's a train line from UK all the way to China. I'm not sure if anybody can drive from here to South Africa, or from South Africa to East Africa and all of. So we need to get connected by train, by rail, even by communication. And my brother have said that we need to remove all, and these are non-trade barriers. A lot of the time we want to take things to Senegal, and it has to fly to France first before flying back. These are the challenges that is within our jurisdiction that we need to deal with. And in doing that, we are competitive, because for you to be relevant abroad, you have to be competitive locally. So we have to fix all of these challenges in-house first. And riding on Jumoke's platforms of cleaning up the ease of doing business, right, getting our trade policies right, making sure that our previous trade policies and trade agreements are harmonized so that we don't have conflict, will also help at the macro level. Because if we get a macro level well, companies, intercompany negotiation between Nigerian company and maybe foreign country, whether in Asia or in America or in the EU, will be facilitated.
Jumoke, I'd like you to also speak to this point, and not necessarily with respect to Nigeria, but he made a very interesting point about standards, and it speaks. It comes back to the point that he made much earlier about fixing the things locally that we can before we can really begin to engage the rest of the world. And your thoughts about on this point?
Well, it's for me not an either or. You're talking about trade facilitation issues. You're talking about standardization and a national quality infrastructure in place. These are things that every country needs to have. I think I'll touch first on the discussion around the Continental Free Trade Agreement. The negotiations commenced in 2015, and this is an agreement really seeking. So the AU, with all fair, to be fair, the AU strategy has been for regions to develop, and at a point, then we go continent-wide.
Yeah.
And in 2015, that decision was taken by the heads of state that it's time to now start those negotiations with a very aggressive timetable to complete it by next year, 2018. Now, what this does is it helps the continent. It may not be perfect, and we don't know how ambitious it will be at the end, but we have started that discussion of continent-wide. With a market size of 1.2 billion people, we are an attractive market collectively. We have like the highest amount of raw materials in the world, untapped raw materials. As a continent, we are a very attractive destination. What limits us is our infrastructure deficit. We're aware of the problem, we're aware of the size of the problem, but like I always say, every problem is an opportunity for investment. So we are looking for partnerships across the world. People with high enough risk appetite are more than welcome, and the people on the continent, the foreign investors investing on the continent, they have not regretted it. They're really optimistic, and they look at Africa as the best destination for investment in the world. Of course, people that are not on the continent don't have the knowledge and are still a bit risk averse. In 20-15 years, I have the feeling that their companies are going to question why they did not jump into this market while they could. So I think even though we have some limitations that we're working on in the area of making things seamless, communication, infrastructure, movement of goods and people across the continent, but the future is really bright. The countries know what to do. We've talked enough. Someone said there have been enough communiques, and that is true. But I will rest it squarely on the shoulders of the larger economies on the continent, the Nigerias, the South Africas, the Kenyas, the Egypts, to make a ring round and to push out, to diversify, to really focus on the concentric circle. When you've sorted out your home market, sort out your regions, really export, and don't shy away from the challenges of, actually, we do have a lot of trade. I would say Nigeria's ECOWAS trade is huge, but informal sector. So we've had a lot of discussions at the administration around formalizing informal trade. Because you wonder, when you look at Nigeria's GDP, you begin to realize oil is not, oil is definitely not anywhere near the biggest. You look at agriculture, a lot of the agriculture is actually informal sector. You look at manufacturing, there's a huge opportunity there for agribusiness, agri-processing, to push our products out across the region and make sure that trade works. Because capital follows the markets, and here we are. The fast-moving consumer goods, it's such a huge opportunity. Everybody that is on the continent is not going anywhere, and I think the losers will be the people that don't cash in at this time.
Jumoke, we'll come back to this conversation. We'll take a short break right now and continue our conversation on trade between Africa and the rest of the world.
African Export-Import Bank, the trade finance bank for Africa.
Welcome back to this special panel discussion on the way forward for Africa as a trading bloc. My guests are Joe Femi Dagunro, former president of the Nigerian German Business Group, Jumoke Oduwole, Senior Special Assistant to Nigeria's President on Industry, Trade and Investment, and Vincent Wani, Director of the Lagos Chamber of Commerce and Industry. Vincent, thanks so much for staying with us, and I want to come to you first.
Thank you.
I think very interesting points made by Jumoke just before the break about that continental free trade agreement and moving forward with that. Can you just reflect on that point? Maybe you want to add your voice to that.
Yeah, my voice to that is simple. Over the years, we've seen a very good relationship between African leaders, between ECOWAS leaders, we've also seen a lot of happiness and harmony among ministers of finance of Africa when they gather, taking their tea and coffee. And even now, these negotiators. But you know what? How are we going to move away from the, can I say, silent competition and jealousy among the implementing agencies? When I say implementing agencies such as Custom, Nigerian Custom against Ghanaian Custom, Nigerian Custom against that in South Africa.
So these are practical things your members are seeing now. The
same thing applies to immigration. The same thing applies to standard agencies or quality control agencies. We've seen a lot of conflict of interest, a lot of competition, a lot of disharmony among this operation. At operational level, we have a very big problem in Africa. At policy level, at governance level, they are happy. It looks to us that they are happy. Those of us in the commerce and industry that have to move our goods all the way, I can't start calling brands here, from Lagos down to Senegal, down to Dakar in Senegal. We know what we are passing through. And we want to even cross Senegal. Now we have Morocco as a part of ECOWAS. We want to go anywhere by road, by rail. We have a very big issue. Between Nigeria and Republic of Benin, sometimes our truck have to spend 7 days just on the issue of certificate of origin. Accepted last week. Is not accepted this for no reason, and these trucks are being delayed. So these are practical issues. And I think Jumoke have to realize this and also see how they can deal with this issue up to the operational level, such that things move very well. Because if we sort out our issues among within Africa, we're doing just 2.5% in volume now, value less than 2%. I think we will conquer Africa.
Jumoke, he's making some practical putting out some practical examples of what some of his members are going through, and I want to hear your thoughts about how we can fix these issues.
Yeah, I mean, Vincent is exactly right. If I look at even trading within Nigeria, the freight issue that he's talking about across the West African belt is very real within the country. So it's not just even across national borders within a region, even interstate borders. You have a lot of taxes and charges, formal, informal, and then the elephant in the room, the rent-seeking opportunities. Right. When you talk about semi-border, documentation or not, there's a lot of, the Comptroller General of Customs just about 2 weeks ago issued a directive to remove all illegal roadblocks. You have all those kinds of transparency and opaqueness and rent-seeking opportunities from the overt nature of human contact. And when SMEs in particular, and that's why a lot of things go under the radar and stay informal, want to move their goods across the country and across the region, these bottlenecks are real. So I will not discount that. But we are working on it. In Nigeria, we've been working on it. Trading within Nigeria is a very live indicator on the Presidential Enabling Business Environment Council agenda. And we believe that as Nigeria makes strides in this area, we'll also make strides within the region, because Nigeria is more than half of ECOWAS, population-wise. Not to talk of GDP, you know exactly where we stand in ECOWAS GDP. So if Nigeria takes the lead on some of these issues, then definitely the rest of the countries in the region will follow. And it's the same thing for every other region. East Africa is doing very well in integration, whether telecommunication, whether movement and infrastructure, roads and rail. And you can see that making a huge contribution to the jump in their intra-regional trade. So it actually speaks to the bottom line, to the pockets, to the lives, to the jobs of people in that region. The Southern African region also, to a lesser extent maybe, but is also making strides. We want to see more of that in West Africa, and we take the responsibility fully as Nigeria to lead the way on this.
All right. And You want to add your voice on
Yes,
this
you
point
know,
too?
like Chubaka said, even in South Africa they have that problem as well. The custom tariff, if you are importing into South Africa within so it's 13.3%. You see, the custom tariffs have to be harmonized in a way that we encourage businesses from all African countries to be able to, move in and do businesses. But it's so easy that for some African countries to come into Nigeria and establish and do their business and be making money and not even get listed on our stock exchange. These are some of the things that, okay, we want everybody to come, but there are some rules as well. And when you look at these border issues that we're talking about, there should be a monitoring group that we continue. The Controller General will not be there every day. And you know the human nature, when the man is coming, everybody seems to make things work. So I think we have to begin to look at a monitoring group. From this meeting, talking about the Continental Free Trade Agreement or Free Trade Area that was discussed in 2015 in Joburg, I think it was being looked at that, okay, by 2017 we should have achieved so much that we can take off. Now Jumoke say maybe 2018 is what was agreed. Fine. But how do we take off on some of these things when we have to bring back the judicial purpose into this? There should be a situation whereby if there is any issue, challenges or whatever, where do we resolve these cases? Like you have the European Union Court that can resolve some of these cases. And I don't think, maybe correct me if I'm wrong, we have such right now. I know the ECOWAS has some courts that can still, but even if these issues have been taken off, I mean, you have ECOWAS giving a judgment and it's not being implemented. So how do we implement some of these things even from the judicial side of it? And if you look at the transportation issue, it's unfortunate that most of the airlines in Africa are going bankrupt this day. Even South Africa Airline, Kenya Airways, except for Ethiopia Airline. So even if a country is doing the best thing in his own area, we can simply invite such a country to come into. It's not just to take over the whole available airspace or whatever. That is okay. Now it's good that Ethiopia Airline is going to Kano and all the other places, but we should be able to train our indigenous people as well, or give our indigenous players the opportunity. But it's so unfortunate that even if you want to go to Gambia, you have to go to maybe Ghana or to Sierra Leone before you connect. Like what Visa was saying, it's so horrible, and that is why most investors as well, they look at, okay, let's go to Kenya and set up a hub in Kenya. Let's go to Ghana. So we in Nigeria as well, we have to look into that opportunities. That look, we have the greatest opportunity to expand beyond just from Lagos to Abuja or to Owerri. We have to encourage our local investors to look into that area so that it will not. We can learn the lesson from South Africa, why they have their issues as well, or Kenya Airways, but there is still an opportunity to learn in that area and grow the aviation industry in a way that it will help us. And if you look at the rail system, I think the government is doing a lot. Even like she said, we have to look at, first of all, the internal issues that we have. And now you have Ethiopia, they've created a rail line between Ethiopia and Djibouti. So if we begin to look at all these areas and we say, okay, this, if it might not even be able to work from 2017 or 2018, but we have to make steps that we convince people that this is working. If you go to Kenya or Uganda or Tanzania or whatever, you begin to see that the opportunities they are giving themselves, especially from railroad and the transportation with rail, the road and the airspace, and it's so fantastic that you can travel within that region with less than $100. So these are the things that you have to begin to look at. And if you look at the way the electricity is being supplied from Mozambique even to South Africa, so there's a regional cooperation that is not being known to some of us. We just look at it, it's just the free trade or it's just the freedom of movement. It has gone beyond that. Though I said Nigeria too, we're doing it in ECOWAS. We have this relationship of gas supply to other neighboring countries. But we should move. If that can work, this gas pipeline thing, if it can work and is doing well, we should be able to look at another area and say, okay, look, let's move. This one is working in the area of electricity or gas supply. What next? We cannot bring everything to the table and make it work at the same time. So if we have to take our time, and like AU is looking at 2063 for some of these things to actually be worked out to make it work. So which is a long time. But between now and 2063, let's begin to look at how many of these things are we taking, even if it's on a yearly basis or a quarterly basis, and then it will not just be a talk show.
And Jumoke, maybe you can also add your voice on this point. I do get the sense that for even the individual countries to make a huge impact, I think there has to be some harmony and leadership on a central level
Yeah.
across the continent to really put that agenda of trading with the rest of the world on the front burner and moving it forward. Your thoughts about that? Because many people continue to talk about political will to make these things happen, and it's either there or it's not.
Well, you know, I think with ECOWAS we could have done a lot more. Other regions that were not in existence when we were in existence have passed us by, have surpassed us. I think to an extent the political will has been there, but the implementation, that sense of urgency, you can hear it in Vincent's voice, that sense of urgency, enough communiques. Can we have an action plan and steps to be taken and who is responsible and let's get it done? That's what people want to see at this point. So political will is now sort of not enough for the people of the region. They want to see action and they want to see it now. And frankly, I can't blame them. That's exactly what we all want. There are issues, it is quite complicated, but truly, with enough of a drive and commitment, we should be able to make it work as a region.
Right.
We have no reason to be where we are as West Africa on this continent right now.
Right. You made a point about it being complicated, and I guess because it is somewhat complicated, we have to see what we can do in the short term and then look for the longer term solutions.
Yes. So we
and
have, sorry, go on.
Okay, I was going to make the point about trade delegations and trying to engage countries, maybe being led by the government. I see a very interesting statistic. Of the over 400,000 companies in Germany, only about 1,000 do business in Africa. And I do get the sense that if the German government, for instance, is leading a delegation to Africa, we can hopefully bridge that gap a little bit as more people get aware of the opportunity in Africa. And I guess it works both ways. We need maybe the political leadership here to also make the same moves.
Exactly where to start is where you see somebody like Joe that speaks the language, that can move across the cultures. Just yesterday, an association of American business people of Nigerian descent visited the presidency to have a meeting with the acting president. Last year, he was in Houston addressing the same group. And just from listening to what the administration is doing, some of them actually took the leap of faith to come back on a delegation this year and see what they can do in areas of health, in areas of agriculture, in areas of IT. This is the rhetoric that we need to deliver. The faith and the hope and what the administration, it's a communication thing. It's defining your own story. First of all, Nigerians in diaspora, very welcome back. Every problem, every single problem is a business opportunity. They have the exposure, they have the access to capital, they have more of an advantage to come in here and do some of those things. So Nigeria is open for business, and I think I can speak for several other countries that are well positioned to receive foreign capital. And don't forget, we're also competing for domestic direct investment because you have Nigerians, wealthy Nigerians, investing in other countries, investing in Rwanda, investing in Ghana, and we need to keep their money home. So even though we are encouraging intra-African trade, because in the past, you would hear of Nigerians investing in Brazil, investing in China or India. At least now, it's home. It's on the continent. This is the way, and it only comes with more communication. When you interact, and then you get to know each other better. So we welcome the idea of delegations. I think it's very instructive when delegations come to a country and they're properly hosted. And by that, I mean they meet all the agencies that they need to meet in a government of the country. They meet all the private sector partners that they need to meet. They meet the bankers, they meet the investors. That is a meaningful trip, and vice versa. So that's always welcome, always encouraged, and I think it actually does crystallize in transactions that are win-win for everybody.
Right. Joe?
You know, fantastic. Okay, what you said, the Nigerians in the diaspora, I've never seen any African that would not be happy to come back home. I tell you, well, that's a basic fact. But the point remains that when you say the German government, when you lead a delegation, Angela Merkel, we go to maybe Japan or name it wherever she goes. those guys is taking along with her, they are going to sign contracts. Siemens and all these other companies, it's deliberate, to say, listen, look, come along with me. And if most of the government officials are coming to Africa or somewhere, they go with an African who is already, in the system with them, who speaks that African language, who will be able to. I want to see a day whereby a Nigerian government will be going as well with an African, with a Nigerian who speaks that language to be in the mix of things. And there are sometimes you see people communicating their language, and that's why in East Africa you see the Swahili they speak gives them an advantage. So now if you go to Germany and you don't speak, no one speaks that language within your delegation, there are things those guys will be saying as well that is not in English. So now you look at the issue of bird strike, in the aviation sector. The German government will be ready to help in that area. But because there are no opportunities for people to convey these to the government in one way or the other, maybe now that Jumoke is talking about it, we can say, okay, look, let's help in this area. In the area of agriculture, you see, the banana you eat in Germany is like it's measured in a certain centimeter. If it is bent from that, it's thrown out. No supermarket will sell it. So we have to begin to look at, and right now, what is on vogue in Germany and some of these European countries is organic food. If we're talking about agriculture, let's look at a niche in the market, organic food, and we'll begin to see that organic food is
that is something that Africa can
that's what we can do.
Offer, yeah.
So, but when we say agriculture, we have to look at the niche in that market and begin to say, look, this is what we have to do. There is this organization, a bigger shoe company, they sell shoes. They went to Ethiopia and they set up the company, putting an African guy there to monitor for the quality control, and they are dominating. So I think our government in Nigeria should be able to do more, inviting the Africans in the diaspora or Nigerians in the diaspora to come. But let them be empowered as well. Let there be a direct source of information or an agency that will be able to take it beyond just receiving and talking and forgetting it there. If you see people coming to talk about, I have organized a lot of Nigerian-German Trade Development Forum. I see people who are ready to come. I see those who have come and they have failed. And I see informations have to continue to be flowing to them. That for the fact that you have been here, maybe you don't have the right partners, but this is the time this is the agency you can go to, and this is what. And the impediment in doing businesses or attracting businesses is just one of the things is lack of information. I repeat that. And what is this? We can even use other means to attract businesses into this country. Cultural means. You see, the Germans, they love our cultural things. If you do that, at the time we did Nigerian Food Festival, if you see people coming to buy our food, despite the fact that some of the food is so hot that I might not be able to eat it, but people were trying this meal and say, hey, it's chaff, it's chaff. It's chaff. Chaff means is peppery. So now you begin to see that they love our culture, they love our people. So we can use that means. There should be always a creative means to attract people to your country. It is not just go in there and say, look, I can do this alone. But there should be a creative means to attract people into our country. And South Africa does that a lot. And all these East African people, they do that a lot. So we don't just go and say, look, we want to manufacture. I tell you what, typical German things, no. They can't manufacture anything from Africa, but they are beginning to see that raw materials can be taken from Africa and they can now use it. Even if it is in the area of raw materials, we can specialize in exporting. Let's make our money. And that is why this continental free trade thing is now really working as it is, because some country will feel that, look, I'd rather go and earn dollar, or euro, than sending it to Nigeria. And there should be this, that's why it's working in euro better, because the common currency is of an advantage.
Right.
So with that, I think there should be some other creative means of trying to bring investors into our country.
We're gradually running out of time, but I want you to speak to this point, and I think he has highlighted it. These soft issues, I think something as simple as education, people being able to speak the language. If Nigeria wants to trade with Japan, at some point, you've got to learn the language. So as Germany has, for instance, made the point about trying to engage Africa more, strategically, shouldn't African countries be positioning for that by beyond providing opportunities for people to get informed about Germany, but maybe to simply just learn the language? That could be the most inviting thing to a German in Africa.
Yeah, these are the soft infrastructure for trade facilitation. You go to China now, everybody's learning how to speak English. That is strategic.
That's strategic and deliberate.
When we were small in school, French was compulsory. What is happening now? So we need to go back to the drawing board, and like I said before, charity begins at home. We need to speak Chinese language. Chinese is the biggest trade partner, African trade partner, the biggest now. They speak our language, we don't speak their language. You know, we need to do something about language and languages, be it in French, be it in Spanish, be it Portuguese language. We need to get our hands on languages. And also, when we talk about trade, we focus so much on tangible goods, you know, but, you know, some countries are even dominating Africa, not on the goods they are sending here, but the services they're sending here. In fact, in the worst case, we're even the one running the way to go and get these services in medical sciences, in IT, even in education. And for you to supply, to trade in services, you know, professionalism, you need education so much. And you need language, as you said. So some of these things we need to clean up. My sister, we were talking about trade delegation the other time. When a president or a minister is going for trade delegation, you see a lot of government workers, you know, in the 30-something, 100 and something. You know, it's good to go with them, but I think that we should also begin to cut down on some of those that doesn't really have transaction to make there, and look at the private sector to complement that delegation, the squad or the team.
Right. Okay, Jumoke, I want you to react to this point, and I think it's quite simple, but could be very important. Languages, being able to have those soft skills to deal with the rest of the world. Can you speak to the need for Africa to develop that?
I can, but before that, I can authoritatively say that we don't go on like road shows just for the show of it, 100-man delegations. I think everybody can testify that the prudence of this administration is not in doubt. And I think that if we go by recent precedent, we will not be speaking about that right now. So I thought I'd just throw that out. Communication, education, health of a people, being able to be positioned. Nigeria has an excellent youth workforce. They are sharp, intelligent. You know, I'm a university lecturer.
Yeah.
Huge potential. They are not disadvantaged when it comes to being able to learn quickly. I mean, our Nollywood tells you this. Our ICT tells you this. A lot of even things like agribusiness, all the innovation that's going on in this country is going on with people under 35. What they need is capital, standardization to scale. It's really important that they're able to communicate. You wouldn't believe, on the University of Lagos campus, there's a Confucius Center, and a lot of business people are learning Chinese. Of course, there needs to be more, and the government also needs to think about making it strategically a language, and because we speak English as a country, so we've had a very good advantage in the West as opposed to maybe Francophone countries or Lusophone countries. But those are valid points. But I think we've seen from the Chinese example that it is not the most valid point. Making sure that there's an enabling environment in which businesses can thrive, when entrepreneurial people, when the government delivers, not if, when, because both hard and soft infrastructure, that is the critical focus of this administration. When we deliver on these things, and it's a marathon, not a sprint, as we begin to deliver more and more on these things, we are unleashing the entrepreneurial energy of Nigerians across the continent and across the world. And for that, I'm extremely optimistic and positive.
All right, as we begin to round up, maybe let me get the perspective of the others on this panel about the optimism of the future, for the future of Africa to trade with the rest of the world, and maybe your closing remarks on what we need to do to make those major strides.
That's a great one from Jumoke to say we need to have a very pleasant environment for investors to come and really establish. And at the same time, it's not just the federal government alone, and like I said before, we have to encourage our state governors. We have to encourage our local government executives as well, so that it will go down, beyond Abuja level. It has to be on these 3 levels, that people at the local level as well will understand why you have to register your business as well, and why you have to pay your taxes. This information education is not just for the people outside this country, it has to be within this country. And like I said, a lot of people in diaspora, they have found a way, and they have been finding ways to help or to assist their own government as well. I can tell you, when you talk about education, we train more than 40 medical doctors. Consultants, like Jumoke said, they are brilliant people. So one of the doctors, I give you a good example, when he was going through this 3 months training in Germany, I think it's from Imo State, he told the professor that, look, if you conduct this surgery on this guy, he would die within 48 hours. Initially, the colleagues there who were German, they didn't believe in him. They said, okay, look, they called the professor to come in, and he said, listen, not even 48 hours, within 24 hours, the guy would die. But you know what happened? That guy got that certificate. It was free. We provided the training free of charge for for something people from all the states in Nigeria. 2 months later, the guy was in South Africa. I said, look, because he could not just, operate on this kind of system, and he wants to leave the country. So when you are training the people and they are leaving the country as well, it's not good for ourselves. Now, today, there is no this kind of the cancer management treatment to manage cancer. A company has set it up in Ghana, and Nigerians now have to be going to Ghana to have that. So these are the areas we have to begin to look in the area of training, education, and health. And lots more people, a lot of more people from Germany, companies in Germany, they are ready to train. Even as back as some 10 years ago, we were training people were coming to Nigeria to train people on photography and videography. So it is now for us to begin to say, look, Nigeria is good, and we are good as well, and we can be good. We can be better in the nearest future. I believe there's hope for us, and I believe we have to work more than what we are doing right now.
Closing comments from you, Vincent.
My comment is that we have to leverage our diversity in Africa. We have to leverage our population. We have to leverage the structure of our population, very youth, energetic, and innovative as well, to begin to feed the world with our trade, with our potential, with our raw materials, and also add values to these raw materials. And in doing so, charity must begin at home. And this is the third time I'm mentioning it in this program. We have to do the right thing and do them fine by trading among ourselves and build on the ease of doing business, whether it is the hard side, infrastructure, or the soft side, that is the policy and regulation. We have to get it right within before we can take it out.
All right. Jumoke, closing comments from you, if you can, in about a minute.
I think this has been a robust discussion. The issues are clear. Now it's about implementation, and collaboration is key. Collaboration with private sector, government, diaspora, Nigerians in diaspora, global partners. Collaboration is key. Everybody, we all know the issues, and if we pull in the right direction and just go for it, I believe we can achieve it.
All right, and let's leave it on that optimistic note. On that note, we've come to the end of our panel discussion on building trade partnerships between Africa and other trade blocs. My guests have been Joe Femi Dagunro, former president of the Nigerian-German Business Group. Jumoke Oduwole is the senior special assistant to the president of Nigeria for Industry, Trade and Investment. And last, we have Vincent Wani, the director at the Lagos Chamber of Commerce and Industry. I am Wole Famirewa saying thank you for watching.
African Export-Import Bank, the trade finance bank for Africa.